Birds 365. Tony Schiltz in for Johnny Mac today with me, Jody Mac. We got Geoff Mosher good enough to come on board with us for a good couple of minutes here. Was out in Arizona leading up to the game, and then had to watch, like all the rest of us, the Eagles come up short on Super Bowl Sunday. G. Mosher, always appreciate when you hop on board, and I know you appreciate as a very good writer the words that you use to describe something. Give me the main reason that the Philadelphia Eagles are not Super Bowl champions and lost that game on Sunday. What was the main reason in your eyes?
Self-inflicted wounds.
That's
Self-inflicted wounds in a close game. You know that in a Super Bowl especially, you have to be more careful, more deliberate in everything you do. And the slightest mistake you make that you probably don't often make even in the preseason or on a regular season might hurt you. Obviously, you look at Jalen Hurts' fumble that led to a touchdown, not a play he typically you worry about with him or makes, but that was a swing play. And then something you did worry about going into the game came back to haunt them, and that was special teams. So that was a huge swing when the combination of a bad punt and a bad, job on the return, which was aided by the bad punt. But that was it. That set it up right there for the Chiefs to get that momentum back after they came out of the third quarter and scored to get themselves back in the game. And that was tough.
Geoff, I have a question for you, and this definitely relates to everything you just said. Because of the self-inflicted wounds, because of the dynamic of the game, the Chiefs only had the ball for about 28 minutes, but they were so efficient and put up 38 points in those 28 minutes. Because of the situational football, the punt return, and the scoop and score from the Chiefs defense, is it fair to say that this probably was Patrick Mahomes' easiest Super Bowl win?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I'm pretty sure they were losing in the fourth quarter against the 49ers a couple of years ago. You can go fact check me on that. Yeah. But this one, I mean, I get what you're saying because he completed a high percentage of his passes, but he was out there, legging it out on an ankle injury that he re-aggravated during the game. They were down by 10 at half. I just think that this kind of comes part and parcel with playing the Kansas City Chiefs. Unlike some other teams, you have a 10-point lead on them. They flourish. They are the best team I've ever seen with a deficit. If you go look at the statistics of teams in the Super Bowl, especially, or in the playoffs, who are trailing by a certain number of points, whether it's 7, 10 by a certain time, third quarter, fourth quarter, they overwhelmingly favor the team that's ahead. But, you go back to how they won their first Super Bowl when they were down by, I think 17-0 in the first quarter of the AFC Championship game to the Titans. And then they won that game like 30-something to 17. I mean, they just completely went on a tear and it was over. So this is what the Chiefs do. The only thing I would say that may have made it a little bit more comfortable for Patrick in this game compared to others is that the Eagles pass rush did not get to him at all.
How much of the lack of pass rush do you think was the bad field? And we know the bad field was the bad field for both teams, so it should affect them both the same, but it doesn't always work that way. We know Hassan Reddick's a speed guy, and Josh Sweat is probably considered a speed guy, not as much as Reddick on the other side, that they just couldn't get leverage because of the field. Is that a legitimate contributing explanation or factor to them getting 0 sacks in this game?
Yeah, I think some of it's fair because you saw instances of guys beating their man one-on-one, then falling. But you made the same point. The Chiefs had to play on the same field. They may not have the type of speed on the edges defensively that the Eagles have, but they have speed at other positions. And I saw Isaiah Pacheco take a draw up the middle and just fall down right in that painted area where he got 3 yards and just slipped and fell. That might have been another 10 to 15 yarder for Pacheco, the way he had an opening there. So it did affect both teams. And I think it hit both teams hard where they are strong, but it's not like the Eagles to not get a lot of pressure on a quarterback. And certainly that had something to do with slowing them down. The NFL should be ashamed. And that surface, it's not the first time it's been a problem. When the Eagles went out there to play in October, we spent a great deal of time on Inside the Birds talking about how many injuries had occurred at that stadium. I think Andy Reid lost a player to an ACL injury either earlier that year or maybe late last year. It's the same stadium. It's grass. So they must say, they say, oh, you guys complain about turf. Well, this is grass. Yeah, but it's like grass brought in on trays, right? I mean, it's not. And then they painted it all up. It was not only did the team suffer, but I thought the viewers of the most important and most watched game in the world suffered because it was silly watching players out there falling left and right. It was like Keystone Cops out there. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Like you said, that grass, the whole situation with the grass, it affected both teams.
Yes.
And there was moments in that game where I felt like I saw Chiefs players falling more than Eagles players. But I digress. You guys mentioned the lack of pass rush. I have to ask. We talk about this defense, and we always talk about the caliber of quarterback they played all year, and how the pass rush has just been wreaking havoc on any and everybody that they faced. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the lesser the quarterback, the longer they take to make a decision. Is it possible, or is it fair to say that this lack of pass rush exposed the lack of, I don't want to say talent, but is it fair that this pass rush or the lack of pass rush exposed the Eagles DBs or exposed their pass defense?
Well, I mean, a little bit, but I think it was more the lack of pass rush coupled with the way the Chiefs schemed the Eagles and outclassed them from an offensive play calling standpoint, exposed what the Eagles do defensively. Because I think individually those guys are talented players.
Agreed.
But if you go look at the two walk-in touchdowns, right? They were caught out of place. Darius Slay followed Kadarius Toney inside, then could not come close to getting him on the outside move, which is something that the Jaguars pulled off against the Eagles earlier this year. Doesn't make Slay a bad player. It just means in that specific formation, the way they play defense against that in that situation is something that the Chiefs saw on tape and thought that they could come up with a counter for. And then the Sky Moore touchdown on the other side, well, that came on a blitz. And I think Avonte Maddox is the late guy to recover. He's not blitzing, but again, Sky Moore sort of came from the outside in, sort of looked like he's either going to line up sort of offset from the quarterback, maybe take a run. They're expecting something gadgety, and all he really does is leak right back out. And we know Avonte's dealing with the toe injury, and he just wasn't quick enough to get back there. He wasn't nearly quick enough to get back on the ball there.
Wasn't even in the picture. I knew Slay was the guy who got victimized on the first walk-in touchdown. I wasn't sure it was on the second because there was no one in the picture. You didn't know who the hell was supposed to be in the same neighborhood he was. The Eagles had nobody there. All right, so the defense comes up small. Everybody wants to lop it off on Jonathan Gannon. And if you're going to give Gannon all the grief for this defensive effort more so than the players, that's fine. But I don't remember people going crazy about Jonathan Gannon holding his two playoff opponents to 7 points apiece in the first two games. So all I'm saying is be consistent. If you want to beat the snot out of Gannon here, have at it. But I hope you gave him all the proper credit for the first couple of games. He didn't do a good job. I'm not looking to give him a free pass, but the players didn't play well. Some guys, Pro Bowls, all-pro players, did not have good games. I don't know if it was always Gannon and putting him in the worst or the best positions, and they just didn't get the job done. He's going to be meeting with Arizona. I already met with him yesterday, and he could potentially be their next head coach. How big a loss would it be if Gannon is not the defensive coordinator of this team next year?
I mean, it is a loss because he's been your defensive coordinator for the last 2 years. You've completely rebuilt and redesigned how you play defense to fit, I want to say fit his vision, because I think that the league was trending. I mean, we're seeing a ton of teams playing 5-man fronts and Vic Fangio style defenses, but the players do like him regardless of, what fans say. And as you just said, he did have a pretty good year as a defensive coordinator. And you're right that it's so we've talked about so many parallels between the 2017 playoffs and this last one. And, other than the Eagles not winning the Super Bowl, same kind of thing. Jim Schwartz's defense was great against Atlanta, was great against the Vikings. It was not great in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. And you could say great against the Giants, great against the 49ers, but John Gannon's defense was not great against the Chiefs. I think the issues with his defense, the one area Jody, I might say this, where losing Jonathan Gannon might be a good thing, and that always depends on what you replace him is that I think what we've learned in 2 years is that the Eagles might need kind of a fundamental reset on their defensive philosophy as to what they want to do within the construct of their defense. Their defense by itself is good. It's got great players. They set a record for sacks. They had all pros everywhere. But for 2 years now, when this defense has had to play a really good quarterback or a really good offensive scheme, and then even sometimes when they haven't, like the New Orleans Saints game, when Dalton starts off 14 for 14, even though that was they only scored 14 points that game, you can never let Andy Dalton be 14 for 14 on you. There are just too many times where an opponent sort of knows what the Eagles want to do and is able to game plan against it. And you just saw that really in the Super Bowl. And by the way, like for people killing Gannon, like 38 points. Okay, 7 were gift wrapped. I'm sorry, 7 were defensive points, right? So we give up 31. I think we can all agree as rational sports fans that when a punt return goes down to the 3, you have a very little chance of, you could say, all right, hold them to a field goal. That's still 10 points that you're then, but I would say that's an easy touchdown for a team. I think the Chiefs score from there on the 85 Bears.
Get right? Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
Yeah, that's a 7 spot.
Right. So to me, I say 14 points are not on Jonathan Gannon, right? It's 24 points, which still isn't great, but you scored 35. You win that game by 11, right? If those 2 mistakes don't happen. But it does bring up to the bigger point that there's just something about what he does or does not do fundamentally that quarterbacks sort of take comfort in. That he's not a pain in the ass type of defensive coordinator the way Steve Spagnuolo is or Martindale is. Like those guys could get beat, but they really make the quarterback either think, and they break down your protection schemes. They do all sorts of crazy stuff that keep you up at night. I don't think Jonathan Gannon keeps quarterbacks up at night. I think his pass rushers do, but I don't think – I think individually some of his defensive backs do, but I don't think what he does as a coordinator scares anybody, if that makes sense.
So let me follow up. Thanks, Tone. If they stay in-house, if he decides to take the Arizona job, it's offered him, he takes it, which, oh, by the way, I'd turn it down if I were Jonathan Gannon, but that's just me. If they stay in-house, Denard Wilson seems to be the most logical choice. Do you think he would go in another direction and or would he just tinker with the defense? Or do you think the defense gets rubber stamp, play exactly the same way they did because he was under Gannon these last 2 years?
You know, I think they'll give him, because he's a veteran guy. He's been a player. He's been an assistant coach for a while. He's well regarded by the team. I think they would give him a certain degree of autonomy of how he wanted to do it. Although I don't think that if he said, I'd like to go back to running a conventional 4-3, I don't see that happening, right? I think that they want to keep the defense that's best for the personnel they got.
Because of Reddick? Would you say Reddick's the main reason that would be the case?
Well, I mean, you drafted Jordan Davis in the first round last year. Yeah, you've got overhang players now, like Hassan Reddick, no doubt about it. So I would think that would be the case. But I do think sometimes like a different set of eyes, a different play caller, or a different philosophy within the same framework can make a difference. And, we will see if that's the case, if it's Denard Wilson or somebody else, if someone else just does something differently, whether it's, I don't want to say more blitzing. Everybody always says more blitzing. No. Jonathan Gannon blitzed what? His second highest of the year against the Chiefs. He blitzed on the play where Sky Moore had a walk-in touchdown. That's not it. It's more about, your tighter coverage, your post-snap disguise, your pre-snap movement, your overloads, your stunting. Like there's 1,000 different things that a defensive coordinator can do to make life miserable for a quarterback. And maybe a fresh set of eyes or a fresh brain on it would be a good thing for the Eagles.
Yeah. I think we all can definitely agree that the Eagles defense, Gannon and players and the turf didn't have their best game.
Yeah.
But if I may, I want to transition to the offensive side of the ball, specifically Shanesiken, former OC for the Philadelphia Eagles, now the head coach for the Indianapolis Colts. Good luck with Jim Irsay. But I have to ask you this, Jeff, just kind of similar to what Jody asked about losing Gannon and what kind of impact that may have. Losing Shanesiken, I'm curious to know what's your perspective on what impact that may have on maybe Jalen Hurts, the way this game is being called for Philadelphia Eagles, and who do you see being elevated to that position, or do you see them outsourcing?
Well, that's a good question. I'm sure they will look at every option. They have some good in-house candidates, one of them being Brian Johnson, the quarterback's coach, who I think would be a really logical replacement because of all the work that he's done with Jalen Hurts and how Hurts-centric this offensive is, and with the RPOs and everything like that. There's a guy named Kevin Patullo who doesn't get mentioned a lot, but he's Nick Sirianni's right-hand man, brought him in from Indianapolis. He's the passing game coordinator, and the Eagles' passing game took a major jump this year. And as we all know, teams like their passing guys to be their play callers, so he would be another one. I don't know that they would promote Jeff Stoutland to it unless he wanted it, but that would be some guy that would maybe be a dark horse candidate. So they've got some guys in-house that are all familiar with the offense that they've been running here both this year and the year before. Now, Shanesiken called the plays, so I don't want to take any credit away from him. And I thought there were times this year where the Eagles were almost brilliant with their sequencing, like what they're running now, setting up what they're going to run next, setting up what they're going to run.
I think that was the biggest jump this year. Sequencing.
Absolutely. The play calling and the sequencing, having an intent and a purpose behind what you're doing, and then keeping it fresh all year long so that you didn't get stale within that. I thought they were fantastic at that. But I also want to say that while Shane called the plays and did a great job of that, I just mentioned three other names, Nick Sirianni, Kevin Patullo, and Jeff Stoutland, who are a really big part of the design of the offense. Stoutland designs the run game. We all know how good and diversified and difficult to stop the run game can be. So I think they're okay keeping it in-house and sort of, I don't know that you're going to lose a whole lot unless whoever gets that spot just is a bad play caller, and doesn't have a good feel and rhythm for the game the way Shanesiken had to have. But I have less concern sort of about how the playbook's going to look, because I still think you have a lot of really good offensive minds coming off this really good year who will be back, and then they'll probably add somebody else to the fold as well.
Yeah, really quickly, Jolie, if I can throw this in really quick, I have to throw this in about the sequencing because you just got me geeked, Jeff, I'll be honest. There was a game, the Steelers game, and I can't remember the exact play or the terminology for it, but there was a play where they set up a screen for Dallas Goedert, and Zach Pascal was the blocker on the left side of the field.
Yep.
Right. And Goddard got the screen pass. And
that was a great screen too. I remember what you're talking about.
Right. And they got whatever yards they got. I want to say maybe a drive or two later, they ran the exact same play, but instead of Zach Pascal screening for Dallas Goedert, he cut up the field wide open for a touchdown.
Yep.
That was so beautiful to me. That was one of the first moments I realized this passing game has gone to another level. The play calling, the sequencing, the intention has gone to another level. You just got me excited when when you said the word sequencing. I immediately knew what you were talking about, and that was one situation that stood out to me.
Yeah, when offense sort of looks like poetry in motion, it's not by accident, and it's not always just because you have great players. Every team has great players. The Steelers have great offensive players. They have terrible offensive play calling and offensive sequencing, So I agree. And that was something that we talked about a lot on Inside the Birds. That was very apparent in the first 8, 9, 10 games of the season. It was there all year, but they kind of went through that scoring binge when Goddard got hurt, where they were just like throwing the ball all over everybody. And I almost felt they got away from the great mix and harmony because they were just going shot play on everybody. Tennessee shot plays, right? And then they got back to it as the playoffs began. And I think it makes them a much more difficult team to defend when they've got 4 or 5 options within each play. And to your point, when they start running different plays from the same formations, right, that really confuse the defense, and your eyes start to get lost because you think you're seeing one thing, but in reality, something else is coming at you.
Jeff, I'm sure you talked about it on Inside the Birds, because we talked about it here on Birds 365. One of the other downsides of just not having a parade after losing a game to the Chiefs is, next year's team is not going to be the same as this year's team. There is a change in the roster every single year. That happens whether you win a Super Bowl, whether you go 2-50, doesn't matter. It's turnover every year. but you feel badly when you have a season like this and you get to the final game of the year and you just come up short and you know guys aren't going to be back. Percentage chance that Miles Sanders is going to be back, because I congratulated him after the game for his last game in an Eagle uniform, because I just don't think, not only doesn't it fit the Eagles' MO of what they want to invest in, who they'll spend money on, turn over rosters, he also didn't play well, was hurt basically last couple months of the season, if not a knee, a hand, or whatever else. What's the percentage chance that they just perfectly aligns that no one else wants Miles Sanders and the Eagles go, all right, you come back on a cheap deal? Yeah, Miles, come on. We'll give you a big hug. Come on back into the fold. Any chance that happens?
Really, that's the only it's not going to be a race to re-sign him. It's not going to be like number one on that priority list of an extension to get done. It is exactly how you said. If the market for Miles Sanders happens to be not what he expected and his price is low. And by the way, that could happen because as good of a year he had, this is like the golden year for free agent running backs. Theoretically, some of these guys can get tagged or extended before. But as we sit here today, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, who just had like a ridiculously good year for the Raiders, right? Barkley, Pollard, Jacobs, and somebody else, 4. And then Miles is one of those 5 guys who's going to be a free agent. So it's very rare in the offseason that you got 5 teams that really want running backs badly. I mean, it's not one of those desirable positions these days to go spend a ton of money on in free agency. So if those guys all hit free agency, it's going to be hard for Miles to find a taker at a really good rate for him. So then you can see the Eagles saying, all right, well, here's our offer to you, take it or leave it. And then he's in a situation where he may feel like, I got to take this.
I think what makes it even harder for Miles Sanders outside of just the market is the fact that you had a guy, a seventh rounder in Isaiah Pacheco, outplay him and on the biggest of stages. And not only did he outplay him, he ran the ball just flat out better. He ran the ball with intention. He ran the ball angry. He ran the ball like he wanted to win this game. And there were moments in that game, especially in the first run play, you saw Miles Sanders just revert back to this, just continue to bounce it outside, and it led to a fumble. Can you speak on just the dynamic of how the Eagles handle the running back position in terms of allocating resources to it? And a guy like Isaiah Pacheco that the Chiefs found in the 7th round, doesn't that by nature make it that much more difficult for a guy like Miles Sanders to get paid?
No, it's always been, right? Because you've seen throughout the years running backs, no matter where you draft them, if you put them in a great offensive scheme and they have a decent amount of talent, they can at least get the job done. Kenny Gainwell, to your point, was outsnapped Miles Sanders, and he's a 5th round pick who didn't even play his last year in college. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to see. First of all, we're 36 hours removed from the Super Bowl, and I'm still having trouble processing and digesting the idea that Andy Reid established the run in the second half of the Super Bowl. I'm still struggling with that because I kept saying, imagine if, because we knew that the Eagles, if you can get them in their 4-man fronts, and the way Pacheco has been running this year, he might be a problem. We talked about that on the Inside the Birds, but then we would say, but you know what? He's going to just ignore him anyway, so it doesn't matter. But he didn't. He stuck with Pacheco, and that guy does run violently. I like his running style. From Vineland, New Jersey, by the way. I'm sure you guys have brought that
Rutgers
up.
guy.
Yeah, Rutgers guy. Well, I don't bring that part up because I'm a Penn State guy. But the Vineland thing is fun to mention.
What we brought up last week was, who is Mike Trout rooting for? Because he's a Vineland guy, and you got a Vineland guy on the Chiefs. But we know how big an Eagle fan he was. I was looking for Mike Trout in the crowd to see, was he wearing a Pacheco jersey or his usual Eagles garb?
Now, Mike Trout is a Millville guy. You don't want to cross the street. They're very close to each other, but they may be rivals, Jody.
When you're in South Jersey, if you're from where I am. Yeah, that's the same thing.
Millville it's just all South Jersey, right? You just throw it all in there.
It's not the shore. It's not up here in Camden/Burlington County. That's one big area.
It's in that's the Pine Barrens. We're all just in the Pine Barrens.
Exactly right.
All right. But to get back to the point, I this is going to be a very interesting offseason for running back, and the Eagles have historically wanted to keep a running back who has had a year like Miles. You know, they extended Shady. They gave Brian Westbrook the money, albeit a little late, but they finally gave him his money. You know, they went a while without having a guy who was sort of a 3-down back, but they don't even throw the ball in this offense to the running back. So I'm not even sure that it's going to matter that much.
All right, I'm going to ask you to evaluate the use of a phrase that I'm going to use. That different people use it for different reasons, have different definitions of it, but you've used it, I've used it, everybody uses it. Nucleus. The Eagles' nucleus. How deep is their nucleus? I'll give you the guys that I wrote down. They're certainly deeper on offense than they are on defense. You got Hurts, you got Devonta, you got AJ, you got Goddard, you got Lane. I'm still putting Lane in. He's young enough that I think you call him part of the nucleus. Dickerson and Mailata. That's 7 deep. That's 7 out of 11. That's pretty damn good. No running backs. Can't put Kelsey in there because we don't even know that Kelsey's going to be back just yet. If you want to put Jurgens in there, I think you got to put him in there with a question mark. If you're going to say he's part of the nucleus, really? And how many downs did he play? That's a question mark for me. The bigger question is on the defensive side. You've got Sweat, you got Reddick, you got Avante, and you got Slay. That's it. That's 4 guys. You want to give me Nakobe Dean? You want to tell me that Jordan Davis has already cemented himself? Last year's draft picks Dean didn't play at all. And Davis got off to a good start, got hurt, got supplanted by veteran guys who came in and took snaps away from him. There were only 4 deep as the core, the nucleus on defense. Is 11 guys enough? Do you have any problems with the list that I put forth?
Did you put A.J. Brown on that list when you're talking about offense?
Oh,
okay. Yeah. No, I mean, I don't have any issues with that list. I mean, this is such a rare situation where you have so many players who are on expiring contracts that I think what you basically did was name anybody who's not on an expiring contract, right? So yeah, that's your nucleus, right?
I left Derek Barnett out if that was someone that you
no, I think he could be on an expiring. I know it was a 2-year deal.
Slay only has 1 year left. I mean, Slay 1 year, 17 million. I don't know if they feel comfortable giving him that 17 million at this point.
I certainly wouldn't.
No, is that enough? Is that enough of a nucleus for us to be very confident about this team going forward for the next several years? Because if you're talking nucleus, it isn't just purely 2023. It's got to be 23, 24, 25. Is that a deep enough number of players for you to go, all right, yeah, screw it. We lost it this year, but we've got a really good chance to go back over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think so. Because the players you mentioned were at players of premier importance to this team and usually in the NFL. I mean, you mentioned the quarterback, you mentioned the wide receiver, you did mention the cornerback and Slay, you mentioned the 2 pass rushers and Sweat and Reddick. You know, you can find your interior lineman, you can find your interior offensive lineman, you can find, a second or third tight end. Linebackers, to be fair, you can find. I mean, the Eagles are on a new set of linebackers every year, it seems anyway. Safeties, you can find. I mean, Lord knows the Eagles don't value safety the way some other teams do. I mean, they haven't drafted one high in, I don't know, since I was in diapers, I guess. So, yeah, I mean, I think if your quarterback plays at a pretty high level and you continue to work on building up the trenches offensively and defensively, then you're going to be good. I think some of the best teams that don't win the Super Bowl, you find that they still get it done within a certain window. Remember the Ravens, for the longest time with Joe Flacco were trying to win the Super Bowl, and they had some really good teams that kept losing to New England. And then the last year of Flacco's deal, he just gets hot in the playoffs, beats Denver on the road. Then they win I forget who they beat maybe it was New England in the AFC Championship, and they go win the Super Bowl. And that wasn't their best Ravens team, but that was the team that, put it all together in that moment. Torrey Smith has talked about that. And I think we've seen that a couple of times with different teams.
So, really quickly, last one from me, Jeff. I appreciate you for locking in with us as always. Inside the Birds, Adam Kaplan, Pacheco, those guys do great work over there. Appreciate you guys as always. Final question for me. Jalen Hurts, he, even in the loss, and yes, they lost the game, and we're not going to try to dress up the L, but the reality is through every game, win or lose, you have to be able to take something from it that you can stand on. There has to be some silver lining. And for me, the silver lining is you found out Jalen Hurts can wheel and deal on one of the big stages. So let me ask you this. Has Jalen Hurts proven that he's the best quarterback in the NFC? And has he proven that he deserves consideration or is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL?
I mean, I always hate judging somebody after 1 year doing that. But I mean, to your point on the NFC, who's going to come in and have a better year next year than Jalen Hurts? I mean, pound for pound, I still think Aaron Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I know he didn't have his best year, but they had to completely reshape that entire team and receiver staff. So I still, to your point,
for some reason, I don't know why I always look at guys like Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady like they're just separate category. I don't know why I do that in my brain for some reason.
No, I think that people do that too. It's just like you almost don't count them because they're on a greatness level. But I would never count out Aaron Rodgers. But I mean, Dak had a heavy interception year. He just wasn't as prolific consistently prolific. But again, I don't like to judge guys on their best or their worst year either. So Dak had 15 interceptions this year, and he went into the year as one of the least intercepted career quarterbacks there was. So maybe it was the loss of Amari Cooper. I don't know. I feel really comfortable in saying this about Jalen Hurts. He was damn impressive. He was the best quarterback he's not a better quarterback than Mahomes, but he had the better game. I mean, he was dynamic. I know he fumbled the ball and that sucked, but he would have been the Super Bowl MVP if the Eagles won that game, and they didn't lose it because of him. So he rescued that team quite a bit. So he's great, and he's got a chance to be top 3, top 5 if this keeps up. But that's something that guys don't just get from 1 year. You got to kind of earn that label by putting together 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of it.
Fair enough.
But I do believe he laid the groundwork for it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, it was a fluke or anything.
Mosh, let me finish up with Hurts as well. Today is Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, Jeff.
Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day to you.
Which means we are 1 month from free agency. March 13th, it starts. Legal tampering, the dumbest phrase in the National Football League. That means the Eagles have 1 month to get the Jalen Hurts contract extension done. You want to have your cap in place. You want to know what you're dedicating to him so you can spend elsewhere. There's going to be a lot of math done, a lot of cap crunching done between now and then. But you need to kind of make the dominoes line up. And the easiest way would be to get the first domino done, and that's Jalen's extension. Yay or nay, and how big is big?
Yes, he's getting an extension, and it will be big. It'll be top 5 big. That's how big it'll be.
That's close to 50 million, big guy.
It is. Now, not to get too mathy on you, but there's a real advantage that the Eagles have here, that he has 1 year left on a deal and that he only makes like $2.5 million next year. Because what a lot of teams do, the Seahawks did this with Russell Wilson, is you sign him to an extension that technically doesn't begin until the 2024 season, right? But you put a lot of that new money, the guaranteed money, you put a good chunk of it into this upcoming season. So let's say instead of making 2.8 on the books, you put like 25 million of that new money he's going to get into next year. That means his cap number is like 27 million because he's already supposed to make 2, right? Around 2.8. So call it 28 million, which is a lot of money. But for a quarterback, that's not a ton of money. If you're getting him at 28 million on the cap, that's bargain compared to guys who are 40, 50, 60 million, right?
Right.
And then you figure out a way going forward to have that extension with 25 million less attached to it because you already paid it up in the last year of his 4-year deal. And that in itself will help keep the cap number down a little bit as you spread it out over 5 or 6 years. So yes, it'll be exorbitant. It'll still make a lot, but I guarantee you when it's all said and done, his cap number year by year for the first 3 or 4 years of the deal will not be what Kyler Murray is getting, with Dak, guys who were right at free agency and first-round picks and had to sign big deals because of what they already were making, what the precedent was.
I like your optimistic math. It all depends on how you look at it. You can either go, oh, this is good because they'll be saving down the road when they could have been taking an even more outrageous hit. Or you can look at it as, wait a minute, he's going to be making $27 million against the cap, and he was making $2 million this year. We're up $25 million in the quarterback position. Yeah, compared to everybody else in the league, he's still a bargain. Right. Compared to himself from the year before, where you came this close to winning a Super Bowl but didn't, as a $2 million quarterback, you go, oh shoot, how are we going to get everybody else in here?
Right, you're still plus 23 million, that you didn't have last year to spend, and then of course that has to come from somebody else getting cut. So I get it.
Exactly right. Which they'll be covering on Inside the Birds all year for you. We'll be talking about it here on Birds 365. And yes, every once in a while we will invite Geoff Mosher in. Anytime he joins us, he brings great insight. Thanks for doing it today, GM.
You got it, guys. Have a good one.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds, the podcast and the website. Jumping in with us here on Birds 365. All right, quickie timeout coming. I got a couple more things to run by Tone. And then Gary Myers, longtime NFL writer and author, Hall of Fame selector. So he was busy last week. The new inductees got in. Always good to shoot the football breeze with Gary Myers. He's going to join us less than 20 minutes.